Welcome, everyone, to the 2022 Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival. Today's event is sponsored by Random House Children's Books. My name is Becky Calzada, and I'm the District Library Coordinator from Leander ISD, and I am so excited to be here with everyone today. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone to please read over the anti-harassment policy that's going to be placed in the chat box, and also remind everyone to please subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you are a school, classroom, librarian, or educator that is joining us today, please be sure to enter our classroom book set giveaway. You can find the link to that entry form in the chat also. So I want to start today by introducing our panelists. So first we have Amanda Castillo. She's a comic artist, illustrator, and storyteller, born and raised in the Bay Area of California. Having grown up inspired by piles of manga, games about friendship and adventure, and the endless wonders of the California outdoors, Amanda went on to study illustration to hone a skill set to tell warm and heartfelt stories that could be enjoyed and remembered by someone like you. After getting into the comic world through working with youth in decline, Amanda has since contributed to publishers such as Boom Studios, Lion Forge, and now Random House Graphics. In addition to making comics, Amanda has shown in galleries domestically and helped judge annual comic awards. When not making comics, Amanda enjoys spending time with friends and loved ones, making warm and hearty meals, yum, learning to tend to plants, and taking in the lovely moments the world has to offer. I love that. Mapmakers and the Lost Magic is their debut graphic novel. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you.
And Jose Pimienta grew up in Mexicali, Mexico, listening to music, watching movies, and walking around as much as possible. They attended Savannah College of Art and Design, where they studied sequential art and developed an interest in storyboarding. After graduating, they moved to Los Angeles, where they currently resides. Jose makes comics with different writers and publishers to create storyboards for films and commercials. Their first solo novel, Suncatcher, came out in 2020. So I want to start today by allowing each of you to give a brief background of your books that we'll be discussing today. So let's start with Amanda.
Of course. So, Mapmakers and the Lost Magic is a story about a girl named Alidade, and she lives in this place called Alden, which is in the valley. And everyone in the valley has never left, and she is just dying to get out. And in her adventures to try and leave, she discovers a secret compartment with a map that was forgotten. And in it contains a magical creature named Blue. And she slowly starts to learn the history of like the land where she comes from and what it used to be, and then seeks out an effort to restore everything to what it once was.
Such a beautiful book. When I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, I've never read anything like this before. And then I found out there's a book two. And so I thought, oh,
Mhm.
that's awesome. So I need to go get the next one. All right. Jose, what about you?
Twin Cities is the story of these twins that live in the city of Mexicali. And upon graduating from sixth grade, Teresa decides that she wants to study middle school on the American side of the border in the town of Calexico, whereas Fernando decides that he wants to stay on the Mexican side because his friends will be there. So the story essentially takes off from how their lives start to differ depending on the city and the school system that they're in, and how that starts influencing their outlook on culture, their day to day, and friendships. So, I think in a nutshell, that's pretty much where it takes off.
Love the sibling, exploration of the siblings and all. It's just such a good book, great book. So definitely encourage everybody to go out and get both of those books. So I'd like us to start first with talking about your journey as an artist. How did you get to where you are today as a graphic novel artist? So, Amanda, would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. So as far back as I can remember, I was always drawing, and I always just loved reading comics. but I never really knew what direction I wanted to take as an artist until I got much older. And then in high school, I had taken a class that was for illustration, and we had done a comics assignment. And I just knew that was it. Like, there was something so captivating about being able to get your stories down on the page, which is something that I always loved. Like, I always loved reading, no matter what the form was. And also pictures along with it, like the ability to like share what you're envisioning with the reader was just it was just mind-blowing to me. So then I went on to study just illustration in general in college, and while I was there, I had the opportunity to be able to go to different comics conventions, with the help of like funding from the school, which is like a super, like, it was such a blessing. And it was there that I kind of got my foot in and got around to knowing people and like sharing my work and just like feeling a sense of community around comics and like graphic novels. Yeah. So here I am today.
And I love that, that school just opened that opportunity for you.
Yeah.
So what about you, Jose?
Not that different from Amanda's story, to be honest. I mean, on a similar level, I've just always been drawing, and like I always loved the format of comics, though. So, like in Mexicali, we didn't have a whole lot of access to comic books or graphic novels or anything like that. I mean, every once in a while you would come across something, but um, most of the access that it would come into things like that would be whenever the newspaper strips, which you had to rely on whatever was on the newspaper. But I also used to go to San Diego, quite frequently because it was a commercial area, and it wasn't that far from Mexicali back when crossing the border was a lot easier. But yeah, like in bookstores, they would always have like compendiums and collections and stuff like that. So that started opening me to the landscape of what else is there in this format of sequential storytelling. And yeah, I was just very taken by it, of like this idea of visually telling a story, this idea of, oh, this is reading, but it's with pictures and it's cartoons, so it can be silly, it can be serious. And same thing when I was in high school in San Diego. I went to the now very popular San Diego Comic-Con. And like this is back in the year that San Diego Comic-Con was like
Nobody knew about it.
I mean, yeah, it was like, yeah. So
in its infancy.
Yeah, I mean, like it's yeah, it wasn't what it is today. I'll say that. So yeah, I went there with friends and stuff, and then around high school, like it was starting to be very clear to me that I needed to make a decision in terms of what to do for college, which was also that I wasn't very sure with, because I didn't really know, like a lot of the conventional majors that I was being exposed to just didn't really ring, and and my parents were very much on like, hey, you have to continue your education. So when I went, imagine my surprise when I went to this convention and there's a school there that they're saying, yeah, you can study comics as a major. It was just like, oh my gosh, what an opportunity. And the rest of it just goes from there. I mean, in college there was even more of an exposure, and I made a lot of friends, and I met a lot of people that have led to, just like staying in touch, and just, same thing, going to conventions and networking, and one project led to another, which led to another, which led to another, and yeah, just it's been an interesting path for for 17-ish or so years. So.
Well, and readers are so blessed to be able to look at the fruition of all that schooling that you had in your early education to now. So let's talk a little bit about the graphic novel process and just the artistic side. What does that planning process look like for each of you?
I can start. So for me, right now with Mapmakers, I'm the artist. So the scripting stuff is, I have some hand in it. Like I get feedback and all of that stuff, but that's not my wheelhouse right now. So for that, It usually starts where I read through the scripts, and then I kind of like get into like visualizing what is this going to look like? What do I want these pages like layouts to look like? And then I actually go and get those layouts out in like really, really small, like thumbnail size things. Just like really quick sketches, just so I can get an idea of what everything's going to feel like. And then those get passed along and go through an editing process. And then I get them back. And then it comes to actually like drawing out every single like detail. So we got pencils, which is just like the cleaner sketch, like the more refined sketch. And then after the pencils comes the inks. And that's like the very, very clean final line work that happens. This is where like the final or most of the final like art changes for the lines happen. And then after that's all done comes coloring, and that's just basically what it is, adding in all the color, and just making sure that everything is feeling okay, looking okay, trying to get the message and the mood across the way, like in the way that's most efficient to the reader. And yeah, that's basically it. It's really like this really long step by step process, but I feel like because it's broken down in so many steps, it makes like the huge task seem way less daunting. Just
Yeah.
like taking it one at a time.
Well, and when you mentioned the color, I think about how the color comes into play in terms of the tone and the feel of the book when you look at it visually. So, what about you, Jose? Do you price maybe something similar or?
Yeah, I have a couple of follow-up questions
Oh,
for
go.
Amanda, actually.
Yeah,
But like,
go for
but
it.
I just want to ask him, like,
Yeah.
do you draw all digital, or do you draw traditional as well?
Oh, so from thumbnails is the only thing that's traditional, because it like there's there's something about like I've tried so hard to do like the initial layouts digitally, but there's just something about it that I can't grasp as easily as if I just like have it in front of me. Like it has to be tangible to begin with. And then that's when it comes in and then like starts to be refined digitally.
Yeah, no, like it's I totally understand what you mean. Like there's a tactability that is just that. I mean, I'm sure that there's digital artists who will, so who have who can exemplify against that. But very similar to Amanda. So I've been fortunate to work on both ends, on working with someone else's script or work on my own. And so just to kind of give a little bit more on that, yeah, like it's usually start from outline to story arc to like a full arc. I like to just write a full script, and well, not full, but like just like the entire script. I like to have it down with like page descriptions and dialogue. Like I don't like to break it down by panels. I leave that for the thumbnailing. And then I do all my thumbnailing in physical media or with a pencil and on a notebook, and those are usually like 2 by 3 inches tall kind of thing. And then from there, once those get approved and passed on, if there's anything that needs to be revised. But yeah, my next step is I pencil everything. I pencil everything traditional, so I still draw on Bristol board with a mechanical pencil. And again, every person's process is different. The process that I have found that works best for me is to just do the entire book step by step. Which is something that I hear it's different for other cartoonists. Some people like to do it in bulks. I like to do it all in one pass of like the entire book thumbnailed and then the entire book penciled. And then I ink with pit pens that I can show you right here, just like microns. So I ink the entire book. I scan that. I letter digitally, and then I color digitally. But yeah, similar to Amanda's process of like, every step you present it to either your editor or the writer to take a look at it, just to make sure that there's clear communication. So.
And what's the time period between like start to finish, would you say? Because there's so much work. I would imagine the intricacy and the detail. It's amazing.
So, sorry, do you want to jump
No,
in
you
there?
can
Or?
go first. You can go first.
So I like to I measure I like to measure it on two different timelines. One is the the productivity one, well, not productivity, but like the depending on the back and forth with either editor or writer. So how long does that take? Um, so that usually takes, depending on how busy the editor is. I have a wonderful editor, but she's got a lot of stuff going on, so it's sometimes it takes a week or so, sometimes a little bit longer for her to respond to me. Hi, Whitney, you're awesome. I love you. So yeah, so depending on how long it takes to get feedback, that can also, that's going to have a say in how long it takes for everything else to get done. But the other timeline that I like to measure it on is just on flat out continuous work. And I have been able to map it down to, for a 230-ish page book, it usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks to thumbnail, about 3 to 3.5-ish months to pencil, about the same length to ink it, and then what takes a long time is to letter, just because it's a whole different mechanic. But again, so about another 3 months to color an entire book for me. So it's usually ends up about a year-ish of production. But again, with back and forwards, it can be anywhere between a year and a half to maybe longer.
Yeah.
What about
Yeah,
you?
I think it's about the same for me.
Okay.
I think the first book took, because the second book, actually, we just wrapped that up earlier this year. But the first book actually took a little bit longer, just because it was kind of just me trying to get the hang of how the whole process works, because it was my first book. And that was about the same. I'd say inks took a little bit longer, because I was just trying to get a feel of what I wanted everything to look like. So yeah, that was about, the whole timeline was about a little over a year. And then the second book, we actually had brought on someone else to do the colors. So it expedited everything and was much less work, thank goodness, on me. And so, but that was also probably, without colors on my end, cutting about 3 months. That would probably be 9-10 months for the whole thing, which is basically following the same timeline as Jose laid out.
Yeah. So let's talk about representation a little bit. So we know that the graphic novel format is super popular with readers, but what we know, and what I know as a librarian, is that Latinx representation is lacking in this very popular format. So how do both books combat disparities and build understanding for readers?
Yeah. So for me, like the world that Alidade lives in isn't like our world one for one. And I wasn't I'm not the writer, but I am fortunate enough to have a writer that was so open with ideas. He had absolutely no mind, or he had no idea really in mind, except for a few clothing details about what he wanted the main characters to look like, what he wanted Alidade to look like. And I was like, this is going to be my sandbox. I'm going to take everything that I wanted to see as a kid in graphic novels in a main character, and I'm going to put it into her, because it just thinking about how I would feel as a 10-year-old reading this, and seeing this spunky girl who has this messy short cropped hair, and she's just so outgoing and loves getting dirty, but she also looks like me. I was like, this would be my dream. So I kind of just funneled those things that I wished I had seen. I don't know if people have seen the interior of the book, but also her parents are shown. Her dad very briefly, but also her mom makes more of an appearance. But when I went into designing her parents as well, because I'm mixed, I'm half Mexican, half Filipino, that also went into me designing like how her parents would look. And I think like just having that outlet to be able to reflect something that I knew so personally, and like a place in like a world where it's fantasy and you can like craft how you want people to look, and you can craft like the towns that they live in and like the people that they're surrounded by. Like that to me is like that was what I was pushing for, basically. Yeah.
I loved it.
Thank
I
you.
just enjoyed it all. It's an escape, you know. And then I thought, this is over. And then found out, and there's another book. Perfect.
Keeps going.
Yeah. So, what about you, Jose?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of there's a lot of factors for me that are like, and they are still happening. Like, you know, for instance, I think that I think I'm on the same camp as a lot of authors, especially, you know, especially of Latinx authors, who are very much on this on the camp of, we want to see the books that we didn't have growing up. Like, we want to see that, like, we want to make the books that we wish we had, and what's even more to that is the books, not only the books we wish we had, but also the books that are still not out there. I mean, I do think that it may sound a little, you know, overly pompous, I guess, but I don't think that it is. That it's more like, well, we want to take on that mantle of making sure that the books we wish we had can actually be there, and therefore taking on that responsibility and that task, and then try to do our best in order to make sure that it has as big of a platform as possible, because as we all know, representation is very significant and it shows results. So the idea of doing that is one that I can definitely get behind. Also, I mean, for me, it was also like, let me see if I can go back for a second. So the previous book that I did to Twin Cities, that also takes place in Mexicali, it was almost by accident that took place in Mexicali. But once I kind of hit that, it just made a lot of sense to me that I wanted to tell stories about where I grew up and why it was so important to me and why it mattered, that there is this city in the border of Mexico with the US that is a very unique place. And I wanted to share that. So I started taking in, like, well, what are shared experiences? What are personal experiences? What am I bringing in terms of fiction? What am I adding to this? And like, how am I, yeah, like in a way, like how am I representing this place that I am so fond of in order to, you know, to an audience? So, you know, those are some of the questions that I kind of just keep at the back of my head whenever I'm writing. It's just like, not only who am I writing for, but like what for, like what. So yeah. So that's kind of how I end up in those decisions.
I love it. It makes me think, as an educator, you know, when we talk about reading and literacy with kids and readers, you know, one of the things we want kids to be able to do is to have connections. What text to self connections? What connections do you have to a book? And I agree. I think about when I was growing up, and there were no books about kids growing up in South Texas. There was, you know, no tamales and all, you know, the foods that we ate. And so it is so exciting to see that. But on the same token, I think about when I first read my first book, like Too Many Tamales, a long time ago. Like, I was an adult when that happened, and the impression it made on me, because I thought, oh my gosh, there's a book that's my life, that's my family. So I totally agree, and I think we just need to have more. So let's talk a little bit about, since mentioning family. You had there were some beautiful dedications in both books. Please share what family represents to each of you, and any memories or inspirations that you had as you launched into both of these beautiful books.
Yeah. So for me, family, like being someone who is from like a multicultural background, and like both sides of family being like really big on family, like that was my first like exposure in all of my life to a sense of community. And I think like that is what makes family so important to me, is just like this sense of belonging and this sense of community, and like having these people here that, you know, they're there for you, whether or not it's like blood related, if it's found family, just like having that sense of community is something that I think, whether or not I was conscious of it, but now I am. But that's just something that like finds its way into my work all the time. And I definitely think that it does come from like the idea of family, and like the idea that there's people there for you to support you and to love you. For memories and inspirations right now, I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, especially since like, I mean, like I was just an artist, but like, I mean, like what I said before with like Alade's parents, it's like I was kind of drawing from my own parents.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think just like taking that like what I know and like the dynamic of them and like kind of fueling it into the book is something like I think the biggest thing that I put into Mapmakers for them. Yeah.
What a wonderful tribute, though.
Yeah, for me, well, I mean, Suncatcher is a little bit more on the found family side because it's, I mean, even though there are some family connections there, it's also a huge part of it relies on, the main character and her friends. But for Twin Cities, on a very similar thing. I mean, as we all know, family is a huge element on our heritage. And I wanted to dive in a little bit more into the weeds on specifically siblinghood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and just what a type, like what kinds of relationships, siblinghood can signify. So me being a middle child and having, I want to make it clear, I love my siblings and they're in my life and it's great. It's, but like it's, without having to go too much into it, it's, as an adult, it's we have gone through a lot and we have gone through so much, and all those things make an impact. And yet, on at least until today, the positive prevails. So while I was writing Twin Cities, there were a lot of moments where just even though I'm making these fictional characters, but based on some real experiences and based on somebody else's experiences and drawing inspiration from again, it's fiction, but it's very personal. But yeah, like there were a lot of moments that while writing that it just made me recalibrate and reanalyze a lot of my upbringing. Very similar to what Amanda said earlier when they're like, yeah, like I used to not think about it and now I do. It's like, yeah, that's part of it, where it's while you're in it, while you're in the process of writing or drawing about family, it makes you be more introspective about it. So yeah, for me, it's like it's a key element, and I mean, like it's basically the primal theme of the book, and it's something that I kind of keep in the back of my head. There's a lot of experiences that I could share, but I think that like for in this conversation, the one that I would like to share is that when I was young and we used to go to the movies to the American side quite frequently because, again, in the 80s and 90s, distribution was a whole different thing. Mm-hmm. Anyways, and in Mexicali, there weren't a whole lot of movie theaters. Mm-hmm. But on the American side, you could always see like the premieres right away. So we used to go to the movie theaters on the American side. And sometimes you would just be in the car waiting to cross the border with your siblings, for better or for worse. And like, like if someone wasn't having a good day, you just had to hear it. If someone was not happy to be there, you were going to hear it. And that was going to affect your viewing of the movie. That was going to affect the meal. So we wanted to be in our best behavior, but we were kids and we were like sometimes not able to be in our best behaviors. And, I mean, yeah, I look back on that fondly of like, well, we're in a car, can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And it feels like the doors are closing.
Kid life, kid memories, Oh, yes. Well, and I think about in the story, just the school memories maybe that could have, come up for you. Or, I mean, middle school was not my favorite or best time. And I was actually talking to middle schoolers this week, and sharing like you got that they have it easier because they get to go in early and learn about their lockers and meet their teachers and know their I mean, like it was just like poof, they just threw us in there and let you go and figure it out. So yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah,
So
yeah.
oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no,
No, go
no,
ahead.
no, no. No, I'm just,
So our sessions focused around graphic novels, and as a librarian, I know that graphic novels can change the way readers see literature. So, what would you tell an educator about the importance of graphic novels?
Yeah, I think like I mean like in my experience, like when I was growing up, like graphic novels and comics were sort of regarded as like a lesser thing,
Hmm.
which is like not it's not true. Um, but it's interesting because when people think about reading, a lot of the times they think about just the words. Um, but graphic novels are unique in the sense that they help kids build visual literacy and like understanding like how emotions connect to scenes, understanding how these things sit in this space, how people exist in this space. And there's a lot that is told in the images with graphic novels that you can only get with the images going hand in hand with text. And I think that's what makes them so unique as like makes graphic novels so unique as a medium. Um and I think that especially now with kids being exposed to like so much that's visual, so like a lot like on the internet, like videos, all of that stuff, it's really important for them to be able to have like an outlet and a space to be able to develop these visual literacy skills. And I think also too, especially for kids that are like learning second language,
Yeah.
it's such an important like step in the
Mm.
process. Like it could be such a big help to helping kids understand like second language, or like learning a second language because they have that image, like those images to help them figure out what the context for the situation is and like what's going on and how to relate these emotions to these words and like all of that stuff.
Well, and it also builds the confidence
Yeah.
when you think about it,
Hmm.
because I'm nervous. The pictures tell a story. They can understand. They get to start to look at the vocabulary. So, and all of those are just important parts of growing as a reader, really. So,
Yeah, definitely.
love
And
doing all that.
like for me too, I mean, there's comics that I'll see that are in a language that I completely don't understand, but I'll still like look at it
Mm,
because like I can get an idea of what's going on. And I think that's something that's so cool about graphic novels and comics just in general, is that you still, even if you don't understand the text, you still are going to get an idea of what's happening. And I think that's something that's great. Like it just really bridges together like different communities, different parts of the world.
yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'll say anything you want to add to that?
yeah, I'll add a different layer, but like, I mean,
Yeah.
100% agreeing with Amanda and everything they said, but like, it's and just, I mean, I guess to make it personal, but yeah, I mean, I grew up in a time where it's kind of similar to what they were mentioning, where like comics and anything with pictures was viewed as, as a lesser form of literature, which now we know for a fact that that's not true. But yeah, anyways, it's the whole reason for that. But yeah, I mean, like I was blown away when when I came into the realization of just how much of a reader I am. It just so happened that I was reading the wrong format, and I want to be careful with how I phrase that because I don't want to cause any kind of just disparity between prose and comics, because there isn't. But it is a different format, and I was in another panel, and this other cartoonist said something that really resonated with me, where he was mentioning how, well, we're all visual thinkers, like most people are visual thinkers, and then through a conversation we started putting two and two together. There's like, well, yeah, if we're all visual thinkers, when you're writing comics, you're writing visually. So when you're reading comics, you're reading visually. like, but you're still reading. I mean, it's a different language. Visual language is a whole different thing. But yeah, I'm very grateful that librarians and educators have done an excellent job in the past decade and change of like really bringing that into the forefront and being receptive to this other type of reading that for a while, I mean, again, making it personal, like I didn't know what was wrong with me because, you know, like I couldn't read a pamphlet. You know, I just saw a wall of text, and I mean, I knew how to read. I went to school, but it was just so difficult to read. But why reading pictures was such a breeze. And, you know, if you give me a 500-page graphic novel, I'll chuck it down in a session, you know, like, and I can't get enough of them. So I think that it's a wonderful thing that prose does a really good job at describing abstract, you know, can describe abstract things, but with visual reading and with the visual language, there's a lot more ease to depict what those concepts can be, and it's a bit it's more on the concrete side. So yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, graphic novels are an excellent tool for that. So, and we can have all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and they can all coexist.
Yeah.
I think I agree. I think, like you said, the visual nature of graphic novels, it's interesting. I've had adults that say I can't read them. They're too hard. And it's because I think they didn't grow up with that visual literacy piece. And then when I think about the language in graphic novels also, it's very concise, precise. And there's a lot of not only the reading part, but the understanding and getting the inferencing that you have to see that can only be understood if you pay attention to the pictures and the images. So there is a lot more to it. And so, yeah, I'm one of those that when I hear the negative, I'm like, oh, no, wait, let me tell you more about that, because we got to change the mindset.
Yeah, which is interesting to me, because if like you think back in historical contexts, there's like so much out there where it's just like literally so much of like art in history is just pictures. Like it's just images, and they're still telling stories, and we still understand them. So it's like it does baffle me a little bit, knowing that like they're like in the past, like thankfully not now, but like especially in the near past, like there was that like a crafted hierarchy of what is considered like higher literature than
Right. An old, classic like Shakespeare, like that's but yet, I totally understand, and I'm with you on that, because I think we've got to change some of those understandings and also think more about how any book, regardless of the format, the level, that it can cause people and readers to think critically and get connections and just have discussions about the characters and what they did and what they would have done differently and that sort of thing too. So what is go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing, and again, not to derail the conversation too much from this, but like it's also important to just like to consider how historically how we got to that point. I mean, like, because what Amanda was mentioning earlier of like, it's why is it that if the more pictures it has, the less the less sophisticated it is. There's a historical reason for that. And it's a historical reason that has a lot to do with the way that printing has developed and how we look at images and whatnot. So there are factors that go into it, and the more you look into it, the more fascinating it comes into the like, oh, these were decisions. These were conscious decisions. Then and these are the circumstances. Unfortunately, things are finally turning a leaf. But I'm glad that we are in this point in time.
We still have to keep advocating for the importance and the place for it, because I mean, there's a place for everything.
Yeah.
So what is your hope for each of the books?
I think my biggest hope for Mapmakers is that it like resonates with people and it inspires kids. Because I mean, like, I have friends who have little siblings, and like it's just, I think out of this whole experience, the most heartening thing that I've ever heard is kids being like, I thought that was so cool, I want to make my own comic. And like that to me is like that, like I think that's the most valuable thing I can take out of working as a comic artist, working as a graphic novelist, because I was the same as a kid. Like I would read I would read graphic novels and I'd be like, or read comics and I'd be like, I want to do this when I grow up. Like I thought it was really cool, and to just kind of like provide something that will enrich kids and show them that they have like an opportunity to do something like this and tell their own stories in the future. I think like that's my biggest hope. Like I hope that I can succeed in that sense.
Oh, it's happening. It's already happening. I can promise you that. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
And Jose?
I mean, dream come true, right? I mean, like I'm making comics. No, I mean, like what do I hope for the book? I mean, yeah, I mean, similar. I mean, I hope that the book resonates, and I hope that the book brings out, has a positive effect on on different types of readers themselves. Because again, just to talk a little bit about it, like one of the focuses on the book that it's not blatantly stated, but I do think that it's part of the story, is that here you have two siblings going through two very completely different experiences. And one of the things that I was actively trying to do throughout the storytelling is making sure that each kid's experience was very valid and seemed fair, and and that just seemed as that it seemed. That it seemed explainable as to like why they were experiencing the world that they were. So my hope is that readers take away that whatever it is they're going through, it's a valid experience, and it may be different from someone else's, even someone very close to you who is telling you that they're having quite the literally opposite experience, but you can still take the same feelings. You can still be having a same reaction, even if you're in different circumstances. So I hope readers can take that away, and I hope that the book reaches an audience that appreciates that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also, I hope that I'm doing some nice PR for the city of Mexicali and Calexico. It's I wanted to draw it very pretty, and I think they're a wonderful city. So
I think you did, and then the maps that were in there and all too.
Yeah.
I also think too you highlight. I don't know that I see a ton of books about twins, so that's definitely something too, and a brother and a sister versus like usually two girls or two boys. So I think that's great too. So
Yeah.
So what's on the horizon? What's to share with our attendees what's to come from each of you?
So currently I'm working on, you were excited that there were 2 books, but there are 3 books. So I'm working on the final book for
Wow.
Mapmakers, which is extremely exciting. I'm actually like hint for everyone here, but in terms of like inspiration for the new region for this one, I am tapping a little bit more into like more like traditional Mexican like dress, also like some of like Southern United States kind of thing. So I'm really excited for that. Like I think that's something that I don't really see too much in like comics. And like I'm happy to like explore that in a world that's more of its own. And then also just like, and now I'm gonna probably be on the horizon figuring out how to write my own stories. I'm still in the planning process. Nothing like super big to share, but I'm really excited for that. I'm really excited to be able to like really like get into telling my own stories and like exploring these ideas that I have and like sharing bits of myself with readers. So yeah, that's really exciting.
That's exciting.
For me, I am. I am looking at a mountain of work right here. So I am currently. Look, I said it earlier. Like I do think that I'm on the dream job, and when it rained it poured. So currently, I'm on 3 projects, and yeah. And it's great. So I'll talk about them briefly. One of them is I'm working on a YA graphic novel with the writer David Arnold. That is called Luminous Beings. These have all been announced, so I can. It's called Luminous Beings, and it's the story of these two friends in high school who are living in a post-apocalyptic world where there are zombie squirrels. And it just goes from there. It's a lot of fun. David and I have been having a lot of fun writing that because it's these two friends, at the peak of high school and just having to go on this insane adventure in one night. It's great. So I'm working on that. I'm also writing on another book that I wrote called Halfway to Somewhere, and that is the story of this kid from Mexicali again. This kid from Mexicali that moves to Lawrence with their mom and their little brother, but their dad and their older sister stayed in Mexicali, so they're having to encounter that. They're encountering that idea of leaving your hometown, arriving somewhere new that is in the center of the U.S. And Lawrence is a great city for that. But yeah, and just also exploring a little bit more when they start encountering other kids that are born and raised in the U.S. but are Mexican descendants, and just what that dynamic can look like. So that's kind of what I'm exploring on this other book. And then I'm working on this other nonfiction book about an incident that happened in Louisiana back in 1980. That it takes place on Lake Penior. And yeah, it's interesting working on nonfiction because it's way more research than I thought,
Yeah.
and just
Well, if you want to do it right, you have to
right,
you
yeah,
have to
and
do the
just
work, the
you have to
research
do
part.
the research and just
Intensive.
looking at and even if for little sorry, not to go too much on this, but even if it's for little things what did cars look like in the 1980s? What did
Yep.
some clothing look like? It's so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now, and
It's exciting.
it's exciting, yeah. So
well, and like you said, you get paid. It's I say the same thing about my job. It's like I love what I do, and it just so happens I get paid for it. That's the best. So what a blessing.
yeah.
So let's see. We are at about 47 minutes. I think we're getting to a close. So I don't know if there's going to be any questions. I don't think there's any because I think we would have heard something by now. But
Okay.
I do want to thank everybody for attending our Building Comprehension and Exploring Identity with Graphic Novels panel at the Latinx Book Festival. So I hope everybody has a really great night. And I just want to thank both of you again for being here and sharing about your wonderful books. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Wait, I'm looking in the comments.
Are there comments? Oh,
it says you have time.
oh, we do have time. Okay, good to know. See, I thought somebody was going to come up and give us questions. So never mind. Okay, so let's go through. Let's see here. Drop your questions in the chat. Let's see. Do we have anything?
It's encore time.
Yeah,
okay, it's okay.
I have a question, if I may, just before we jump in. Amanda, I have a question for you. That what has it been like working with a colorist? And can you tell me a little bit about that process? Did you seek them out? Did the publisher handed them to you, or did you have to go through a process? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we got I initially was considering it, but then the publisher was like, we kind of want you to have a colorist just to sort of have the process a little bit expedited. And that it's been great. So I had the opportunity to recommend people. And so I know the colors that I'm working with. And so it makes it much easier because we have the level of communication already. And a lot of that it's a lot of back and forth. So it was a rocky start, but we got into the rhythm of it where I have her just I'm this is what the scene is. It's at it's evening time. It's cold. It's winter time. So then I give her just that very rough basis, and I'm like, okay, now lay down what you think that feels like. And then so she gets that down and then comes to me for a pass and is like, do these colors look good? Is everything looking okay? So then I kind of just approve it, like look over everything, have notes. I'll give notes, and then I'll approve it, and then it'll go just through like the refining process. And then right before submitting like the final file, she'll pass it along to me again, and just to like double check and then send it along. So I think like it definitely is different for everybody, and I really am lucky to have that I was able to bring somebody on board that I already knew, just because it makes communication so much easier. But yeah, I think like the biggest thing I did learn was just like letting the colorist like do their thing. Like they're being hired to like color your book and like just like put their like own like skill and like artistry into it. So I think like having that level of trust for them to like be able to do like an efficient job definitely helps it go along.
Yeah.
So we do have a couple of questions. So let's see. Are there any questions you suggest students and educators ask themselves when approaching a graphic novel? That's a good question. Oh, that's a hard one.
Yeah,
it is a hard one.
Other than asking yourself, I guess, what would you add?
Well, I think like first, like, well, what is your interest? Because
Right,
there are so many different genres within a graphic novel format. Like there could be fantasy, there could be a realistic fiction, just all the things, right? So maybe that's a starting point.
I guess I would start with like, what are you looking for? Or what are you in the mood for? Because I'm gonna take the lead off. I just bear with me. So I was talking with another cartoonist, and we were talking about how sometimes when you're trying to educate people on comics, where do you start? Like, do you start telling people about the art, or do you start telling people about the story? And it's a very, it's kind of like it's a very bizarre track to be on in general. And one of the things that I was going on I was saying that, well, it's tricky because I know that there are other artists that I look up to that their art has been an influence. However, there has been a lot of graphic novels out there that have had a tremendous impact on me, but neither at first glance, the story is not something that I would be immediately interested in, and the art doesn't look like anything I would do. So it would have been very easy for me to be dismissive, of just be like, well, I'm not going to read that. However, if I ask myself, well, what am I in the mood for? Like, am I interested in this story that might take place in an alternative universe? Like, yeah, I guess so. And then before you know it, it turns into my favorite book ever. So yeah, I hope that made sense. But yeah, I guess I would ask, I would tell educators to ask themselves, what are you looking for? And what options do you have to look at, to look at?
Yeah, I definitely agree, because I think like also with like educators specifically, also like, what are you looking for? And then also, what is it that you think like students would find like helpful or useful or like inspiring and all of that stuff. I think just like having the level of like understanding and just really trying to like figure out like what is it that like they're looking for, and like what is it that they're interested in, because like there's graphic novel series out there that like are huge with kids, and it's like maybe using that as a jumping off point, it's like, well, what is something that kind of falls within the same category or like the similar vibe, but is something that might not be as well known, and kind of just using that as like a starting point.
What are some, there's a question, favorite graphic novel authors or illustrators for each of you? Another hard one. There's so many great ones.
Gosh, yeah. Amanda, do you want to start?
Yeah. Right off the top of my head, there's this one Japanese manga series called Witch Hat Atelier, and the the author is Shirahama Kamome, and her work is just like breathtaking. Like I was reading some stuff about her, and I guess even though like I guess compared to her peers, she had a lot more exposure growing up, surrounded by like Western media. So she's like a huge like DC, Marvel, Star Wars fan, and also just like Western world fine arts too. So it like really informed her work, and had like is like this really beautiful bridge between like what she knew growing up and then like what she was exposed to outside of like her culture. And it's just wonderful, and the story is wonderful. It's about this girl who wants to become a witch, and she, through kind of unfortunate circumstances, does, but it does touch a lot on like personal voice and like art and how that plays into the world, and then like even tackles like societal struggles and all of that stuff. Like it really hits like so much across the board. Like that's my current favorite right now.
And say the title again.
Witch Hat Atelier.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. What about you, Jose?
I mean, there's a lot, and kind of, I'm gonna see if I can tie it to what I was saying earlier, because I mean, yeah, like it also depends on what age group you're looking for, because you know, because I'll throw this in, like I know how old I am, but there's a lot of middle grade books that I love profoundly. There's a lot of YA books that are very, very significant to me, and there's books that I would love to tell more audiences about, but they're a little bit more on the more mature adult side. So I always try to be like conscious of like, who am I recommending this for? Right. Like for instance, I wish everyone would pick up a copy of The Magic Fish or Kiss Number 8. Or the or the Prince and the Seamstress, or Witchlight. Like it's there's a lot of these books that I like highly recommend, that I take very personal. One of my favorite cartoonists is Nate Powell, and he does a lot of like his Save It for Later book is really good because it's a collection of essays, but he's mostly known for his March series. But I also really loved what he was doing beforehand, where it was like this very weird magical realism story of teenagers in a way of looking at the world. And his ink work is phenomenal. But I would love to keep just throwing books in that direction. But also another one that comes to mind that I want to recommend a whole lot more is a book called The Hard Tomorrow, which is a very heavy book. Like it's not that long, but the subject matter is very heavy. It's a rough book, but it's so good. And that being said, I don't know if I want to say that that's a book for younger readers, but I think that it's really good.
It might resonate with the reader, though.
It might resonate with the reader. So I mean, for the longest time, This One Summer was one of my favorite, graphic novels ever. But again, like don't know if I want to walk into a middle school classroom and say like this book. But
in a library, I think the thing too is that maybe it's not a book like an all class read for a curriculum unit, but it could be a book in a library that a student decides to pick up, because the library is a place where nobody's forced to read anything, right? And so, or if they just want to pick it up at a bookstore and purchase it for themselves. So you just never know, like you said, which book is going to resonate.
Yeah, and also, I profoundly love Be Prepared. Like that book was just, my gosh, like that book was just such a thing. So anyways, I can keep so
many great well, and isn't it just great to see how graphic novels have just evolved over time? And there's a series or a illustrator, just novelist that just rises every year, and I think it's a beautiful time to live in right now.
Yeah,
because there's so many great things coming out, and again, the representation it continues to get better and better, because I think that's something that just is, it's never going to be perfect, but we're going to keep pushing. So
and that's also something that there's a podcast out there that I really liked called Graphic Novel TK, that I highly recommend. But anyways, at some point they get to this topic of like, because comics are, a story and an illustrator, and as Amanda has mentioned, that they work with a writer, and but yeah, like sometimes trying to figure out if you like a writer, but not an artist, like does that mean like what does that say for an interest in the story? And it's like, well, give it a try. Or if you really love an artist, but you find out that they are teaming up with a writer that you're not very familiar with, that can also be like a great gateway for getting to know some of their work. So that's what I think is really cool about graphic novels in general, of just like, yeah, it's sometimes like this, sometimes you do bump into people that are writer creator, writer artist, they do the whole thing. And then there's others where it's like, well, they can be a team, or it's someone who just does different things. So
Amanda, there's a question for you.
Yes.
Let me read it here. I'd love to hear how Amanda is approaching writing their own stories and how it's different from the collaboration that they just did.
Okay. So the first part, I'm still kind of like learning, going through the steps. I think for the I'll speak on the collaboration portion first. It's different, but like it's not like too different. I think for me that one is like I don't have to pick my brain as much. I don't have to really like get really deep into like what is this character's intention? Like what are they trying to achieve? Just because it's like I'm not the writer. But I still do when I'm drawing. I still have to consider what are their intentions, like what in the script am I getting? Because the interesting thing about being an artist or being an illustrator for a graphic novel is like I'm reading the script, I'm reading the story, and first and foremost I'm the reader, and like I need to understand what the writer is telling me about these characters and about what their intentions are and like what their actions are and like how they go through things in order for me to like in the best way possible interpret it into a visual format. And so I think they're like what I'm going through right now with sort of figuring out my own stories is just sort of like the extra added layer of like being the one to decide like what happens and what the intentions are. And I think it's just like it's kind of like if this is the book, I'm like tacking on like just another separate portion. But I think like in terms of like visualizing things, it still follows the same timeline, or it still follows like the same thought process. It's just it's just like I'm in charge. Like I'm the one making the decisions. I'm the one that's like character does this, and there's no one to be like no. They actually meant this because I'm in charge.
Yeah, they is the boss, which is awesome.
Which is like there's like there's something nice about being able to like be the reader, be the artist, be the reader. But there also is like there's a feeling of satisfaction that I get where I'm like I can I like I'm in charge. Like I call the shots. Like I can make them do this. Like I think that they would do this. And it's like
it's wholly yours.
Yeah, it's like it's like from my brain.
So there was another question. Do they have any recommendations for educators or librarians looking to grow or start their graphic novel library? So we had you all mentioned some titles. Any other suggestions? And I guess I would wonder too, like grade levels, because I think sometimes, like, are we talking about young readers? Are we talking about middle schoolers, high schoolers, adults? I mean, because there's so many different ranges of titles.
I think that starting off with the classics is a good stepping stone. I mean, Calvin and Hobbes still rocks. Like it still holds up. It's still very good. Non sequitur is still a really cool graphic, it's still a really cool comic strip combination. But also for building up a library, I mean, I guess I would answer that with a question: where is this library?
Mhm.
Because then that would also matters into like if you're in a particular part where there's a specific type of population, catering to that community may be more responsive, because again, I'm just going to paint a picture. But if you approach a community that is predominantly speaking in Spanish, and you put in a bunch of books in French, like some of them might pick it up, like as Amanda was mentioning earlier, like, yeah, they'll see the pictures, like they'll still get into it, but nowhere near to the same extent if you put in some comics in Spanish, or like some, or some historically valuable, comics from South America that are in Spanish and that can reach out. So I guess that would be like a follow up that I would have for them, to like acknowledge where you are and what the community may be responsive to, and like there are comics for those communities. It's just a matter of making them accessible. So yeah, but other than that, the hits are a great start. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm making books for Random House Graphics, so I would love to recommend a lot of Random House Graphic books. Right? Yeah, so it's
I think they should put some of those links in the chat.
Right. So, but like but also, it's Iron Circus has a great catalog, and there's other imprints that do amazing work. So,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I think like echoing that, it's like really getting to know like who are you serving, like who is your community, and because I think when it comes to creating like these spaces that are more communal, like it's best going to be built by having like establishing communication with the people that you're working with. So like I mentioned earlier, like ask students, ask just like people that come in, like if you're a librarian, like what would they want to see, like what kind of books, like what kind of topics, which like makes the search for things easier too, because when I like look for books, like it's so daunting, like there's so many books out there in the world, but like really narrowing in like what is it that I want to see in a book, like what kind of character do I want to see, what kind of story do I want to read, what kind of genre, and like just having those like key, like those key categories just really helps to narrow down like what do you think would be good, what do you think that the community that you're serving would benefit from, and it just like really goes a long way to just like ask like what kind of stories do they want to be, like what kind of stories do they want to read. So
Well, I think about too, like we're in the middle of Latinx Heritage Month, and when we think about book displays in libraries, are we displaying all kinds of formats too, not just the print? Do we have, graphic novels there too? And then I also think too, are we making sure that whatever a reader chooses that we honor? Because we still hear about people saying like, no, that picture book is too baby, or there's these judgments that's happening. So, how do we honor readers whenever with whatever they choose, whether it's a graphic novel, a picture book, 700 page, Harry Potter book. I mean, just whatever, just honoring what they love and allowing them to select. So one last question.
Okay.
What's one of the best lessons you've ever learned from a graphic novel or comic? Ooh, that's a good one. Best lesson.
From the book itself, or from working in comics?
I mean, I think you could do either or both. I don't know.
Oof. Well, Amanda, do you want to jump in? Or?
I'm still thinking.
Well, I'm going to start.
Yeah.
So I think about the Mapmakers book, and when I think about what Alida had to go through, when think about the restrictions that she had upon her, and the courage that she had to still try to do what she felt was right. I mean, I think that's a huge lesson that we can learn for life, not just because it's in a book, but just for life. That even though, you know, it's going against your rule, you know, those kinds of things. I think those are huge lessons that, you know, like a character can show us. Um, and I'm sure I mean, there's so many books that teach us those kinds of things. I love when I read a book, there's like a line in a story or an image in a book, and it just kind of resonates. And um, I don't know, maybe not just a graphic novel. I mean, maybe any book for y'all. What would?
Yeah, I
Um,
think. Oh,
no,
I,
no, no, please, please, please.
I
Go
think
second.
like going off what you were talking about with like map makers, like when I reflect on it and like how I said earlier that first, like when I get the script, I'm a reader. And I think like something that's really like that I think is really nice about like having worked on this book is like one of my biggest takeaways from the Mapmaker series was like when it was initially pitched to me, um, the separation like what was pitched was that like what would separate Aldaid from like other like heroes was that not that she was necessarily trying to save the world, but rather that she was trying to like just learn more and like
Mhm,
understand it. And I think the like reading it and like going through her whole journey of like understanding like the like her home and like where she comes from and like what it used to be and like what she could set out for it, like what she could help build it to be. And I think like that was something that I felt resonated so well was that like how can we work to not just like kind of keep the integrity or like how can we like build things for the future while still holding like keeping the integrity that it has.
mhm,
um and I think that's something that really resonated with me and like just existing on earth, like how can we kind of like keep what we know while still like building for a future.
mhm,
um and yeah, like I think that's one for me. And then this one that I've been thinking about is like recently, um, is like from more of like an artistry standpoint. That series that I mentioned earlier, which had Atelier, there is a storyline following one of the little, like one of the girls, one of the students, and she goes through like this whole thing where she's like, I don't want to learn what everyone else is learning because what I know is what makes me unique. And like that's what makes me me. And if I do what other people want me to do, then it's not going to be me anymore.
mhm,
And so she goes through like this whole like period of defiance where she's like, I want to learn anything more. But the what like really resonated with me like as an artist that I didn't see a lot of growing up, as I was kind of like building like into like my career now, is that the kind of like culminating point of her whole character arc is that she realizes that no matter what she does, and like even if she's doing like exercises or lessons or something that somebody's asking of her, like everything she makes and everything from her is going to be hers, and inherently it's all going to be connected to her. And I think like that sort of like that lesson that like we can be doing things that other people tell of us, but like only the stuff that comes from us can only come from us. And I
mhm,
think like that was something that when I read it I was like that's right, like we're so unique in like our own experiences as humans. And like even if you are like doing like copy like studies copying like drawings because like you're trying to learn how to do like basics and stuff,
mhm,
it's still going to have like that touch from you, and like we all
mhm.
perceive the world differently. So I think
The
that that was something
uniqueness.
that was, yeah, that was
Mhm,
very
mhm, mhm. Jose, I'm just going to say something about your Twin Cities book too that I think is a great lesson. I think not only do we learn about, you know, the interactions between siblings, I think also to just um, there's opportunities to learn about peer pressure,
Yeah.
which I think is a very real thing. And when I think about when I talk to parents about books and stuff, I say, things like sometimes a book always offers us the opportunities to walk in a character's shoes, so that when we're at that point in our life, that hopefully those characters maybe taught us how to proceed with caution, so I mean, I again just love both of these books, and think that they along with so many other books, they just have so much to offer readers and to teach them about life, and where they fit in the world, whether it's again, a book about fantasy or realistic fiction. I mean, I just love that books can be windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors for all readers too. So I think we're at like 7:16. I don't think we have any more questions, do we? Let's see. We double check.
I'll
Go ahead.
go on ahead and
Oh,
answer
yes, go ahead.
I'll go on ahead and answer the question. Like I'm gonna give 3 if that's okay.
Yeah,
It's
go
just
for
like,
it.
And by the way, I apologize. The sun is
No.
coming right
Yeah,
through, so like
It's that time of day.
I'm starting to get like that nice little, like, cinematographers are envious right now. Oh, look at that! Look at that glow that's going on. So some of the lessons that I've learned from books that I learned from comics is shout out again to Vera Brosgol's Be Prepared, because I think that one of the lessons that I took from that book is just how it's going to be an ongoing balancing act when you come from a particular background, and yet you are living in a land where that background is not the default.
Mhm.
And just like this, what responsibility do you have to your culture in order to be respectful and mindful and engaging with that culture, while still wanting to push your own identity and still wanting to be an individual. And I think that that's something that a lot of us deal with, in terms of like, well, we all want to have a sense of belonging, but sometimes our heritage is also one that is not the main one, or is not the default, and like learning to balance that, and like in both how to honor and respect it, but also give it its, but also not have it be like the forefront of your sole identity, and that is something that I think a lot of us have dealt with, and it's a difficult thing to learn how to navigate. And I think that kids learning that lesson is it's really cool, because some of us are still learning that as adults.
Mhm.
And when I first read Be Prepared, that's not entirely what the book is about, but that's one of the things that just really resonated with me. The other one that I give a high kudos to is that there's this book that I forget the name of the author, but the book is called The Dodo. And it's about this girl who something is happening with her parents, and she's not sure what it is, but she knows that she has just moved into this one place, and she encounters this dodo bird who is just going around wild. And eventually you kind of realize that, I mean, it's not subtle. It's basically the dodo is how this girl is expressing herself for this feeling that just didn't have a name, or doesn't have words, or doesn't have any other type of imagery other than this thing that she's not aware of and doesn't know how to communicate. And of course, this dodo is running around and causing mayhem. Yeah, so it's a very short, wonderful book that I highly recommend. And third but not least, and because we are in this month, I learned from Jamie Hernandez on the art side that trusting your ink work and trusting the black and white contrast to make an image that can still look naturalistic, and making your human figure still look like it has weight and still look like it's moving naturally, is achievable, and just in a way that I just didn't know it was possible. So like going through Love and Rockets was very formative for me, of just like, oh my god, like, because again, everything that the Hernandez brothers do, I think, is really great. There's a lot of really cool stories there, but art-wise, specifically, Jamie's work is one that, like, just like, how do you do it? So every time that I look at some of his work, I'm just like, yeah, I'm learning right here.
Artists have a way to make art look effortless.
I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
How do they do it? I don't know.
Don't know.
I'm trying
One
really hard.
last question, I think.
Sure.
Let's see. What are the what are you most excited for when you think about the future of graphics and comics? Ooh.
Yeah. I think what we've been talking about, like from where it was in the past, where it is now, like just where like seeing it keep growing, and like seeing so many people now that like are like have that are getting the chance to tell their stories. And just like even like the complexity of stories. Like I think that there's a point where like kind of when like with representation where there's like an entry point where it's like what are the stories that are being like that are being told right now. But then when you get to a point where you kind of there's a lot of like representation within like a certain demographic, it's like okay, so now how complex, like where like the stories are going to get more complex, and like they're going to get more like unique, and like they're not always going to be like clean. Like there's a lot of complicated feelings, especially with being like with being Latinx, like in like America, just like specifically as an example. Like it's not always going to be um like a clean cut story, and I think
Mm,
I'm excited for that future. Like I'm
mhm,
excited that there's going to be like there's now starting to be space for like on a mainstream level for like these stories that are like
mhm,
more complicated and more
mhm,
complex emotionally
mhm,
and just like messier, because it's
mhm,
like our history and our heritage is it's never been so straightforward. Like I
mhm,
think,
mhm,
but then I think that's also what makes it so interesting and it makes
mhm.
it so enriching.
Yes, the authenticity,
Yeah.
and that's what resonates, especially when it's another Latinx reader that says, "Oh, I know what that feels like," or
Yeah.
I had that same experience." Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
Lisa?
For me is the recognition and acknowledgement of diversity,
Mhm,
Mhm.
because like there's always been diverse authors, there's always been diverse cartoonists. It's just that for the longest time it was very difficult for them to get recognition, and it was very difficult for them to get acknowledged for multiple reasons. Some of them very banal, and some of them very intentional,
Mhm.
with drastic repercussions. I mean, we have there's unfortunately we have lost so much artwork and so many stories through time just because there weren't the means of distribution for these stories to get recognized, um, because this is where we live. But I am very excited that we have people, in the education system, in libraries, and socially speaking, that are fighting tooth and nail to
mhm,
defend what is the acknowledgement of why these diverse voices should be recognized and should be heard, because they will resonate and they will have an impact on future generations that are saying,
mhm,
oh, like there are other things, and there are like there are a lot, there's validity to this, to the
Mhm.
complexity.
mhm,
So yeah, I'm very excited for all the work that has been going on, and that there continues to be, especially
mhm.
in the current climate.
Yes, I was
you
gonna
know
say
you
because
know
graphic novels are
yeah,
definitely,
a-
getting attacked on the
Yeah.
yeah.
censorship front.
And like it's I know that a lot of us are doing what we can, but there are those, and again, librarians and educators that are indisputably on the forefront, fighting for saying, no, this books should be accessible,
Mhm,
these books
Mhm.
should be on the shelves. And just to have people like that,
mhm,
it's just it's it's beyond the pearls inside a clam.
mhm.
So
Yep. Speaking of with experience on that, I mean, definitely, agree, and so, authors, I think authors, librarians, readers, parents, community, just partnering together and doing what they can to, continue to advocate for having these books and representation and just following processes. Like, let's just follow our processes and not rush to judgment about
Mhm.
any book. So, Okay, so just so everybody knows, we did add I saw that they put all the links for all the different books that were recommended, including the Dodo. I mean, all the books. Be Prepared, all of the graphic novels from Random House. So there's quite the list there. So that's great. And again, I just want to make the time to say again, thank you to both authors for being here today. Thank you to Random House for sponsoring today's event, and thank you to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival for making sure that we could do this today. So just so very happy to have worked with both of you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is such a huge honor.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.